Hi, I'm Suzanne Dell, and I'm the chair of Region 2. Thank you for taking the time today to watch this new respondent training. It's separated into three parts. You will have anti-bias training with Dr. Lynn Garriock. You'll have regional training on responding by Will Kilroy, and then I'll come back and go through our respondent page on our website. Thanks a lot, and see you at Festival.
Hi, my name is Erin Vago, pronouns she, her, and I graduated from Elizabethtown College in 2022. My favorite response was when our respondent was excited, engaged, gave critiques, and was complimentary on his favorite parts of the show.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Will Kilroy, and for years, along with my teaching partner, Peggy Ray, we led the respondent training at KCACTF festivals in Region 1. I'm also a former chair from Region 1, and I'm now department head of theater arts at New Mexico State University, and I've been state chair for KCACTF here in New Mexico, and I continue to respond. So just so you know where I'm coming from. So getting started, I would just strongly suggest that you take notes. I've been where respondents have not taken notes, and to me, that's a challenge, and that's not something that I would want to do. So I would think about taking notes, and if you don't know about them, there are great pens that just light up the tip. We used to give them out sometimes at our response sessions so that you're not disturbing anybody around you, no matter where you're sitting in the auditorium, and you can take those notes. And you also want to think about organizing those notes. So how do you choose to present? And that can really be individual. You might choose to go chronologically through the play and then make notes about design elements and other elements or things that went slickly as far as stage management and calling cues, as well as the acting. Or you might choose to divide it up and do all the acting notes and the design notes and the tech notes. So that's really up to you, but you want to make sure you stay organized. So when I've decided to do it that way, I have the notes in the margin of acting, design, whatever it might be. So that's something to think about as far as how you want to work through the show, and just making sure that you really do comment on all of the student work. I think sometimes the tech people and the stage managers can feel a little left out. So you'll also want to let the team know, how are you going to present? Will it be chronological so they're realizing you're going to get to their point at some time, or are you going to do categories so they'll know that their category will be up and coming? Of course, if it's all faculty designs, you're going to gloss over that because we don't really focus on the faculty. It's really for the students. But per se, if there were a faculty costume designer and you could comment on how a student worked with a certain costume and how they really inhabited that costume. So then it's focused on the student work, even if it was a faculty designer. And same thing with the set or props. So you really need to be sure of the program or ask the questions if you're not sure of someone's faculty, staff, or student, because we want to make sure that we focus on all the contributions of the students. So when you're introducing the whole event there, when you start your response, you want to talk about being a Kennedy Center American College Theater Festival rep. And if you go to their site, of course, you'll see that part of the mission is to celebrate theater and celebrate and recognize the work of our students all over the country. And I think by talking about that a bit, you can put them at ease. And you also want to let them know, because they're participating, they're also able to go further, and there will be nominations for awards and to participate in the regional festival. So it really makes it a celebration and celebrating their work. And I think that way they're much more apt to be open and listening when you set it up that way. You want to make sure and tell them that you're there as a fellow theater practitioner. You're not there as a critic, but instead you're a witness to their work. And it's very different from adjudicating, which was the old term, now being a respondent and truly responding as far as that goes. Remind them that no matter what they hear from you, that their show has already been directed and that you are not redirecting it. And even if you give a comment that makes them think about another choice, they should think about that idea for a future show, unless they have a discussion with the director and there are a few more shows and the director is willing to let them try something. But otherwise, really acknowledging the director's work is done. They're the boss at that point, and you don't want to change the production at all. Let's see. So if you're responding to a small cast, you might want them to introduce themselves and what role they played or what production element they were involved with. You might have a huge musical with a cast of 35 or 40 students, and really that's not feasible. So then you might ask as you go along if you have a specific comment about a certain character. Now, who was it that played that character? I find that when students come out onto the stage after performance and they're out of their costume and makeup, they often look very different, and I'm not recognizing them as the character. So it really helps to ask about that. To start the response, you can talk about the aspects of the event that you noticed even before the show began. So did you see a poster in the lobby? What did the program tell you about the play? Was there pre-show music, and did that set a certain atmosphere for you? Did you see the set on the stage, and was it pre-lit in a certain way, or were the curtains drawn and everything was a surprise when they opened? So all of that enters in. Maybe you had an interaction at the box office or with an usher. And even those people that are oftentimes students really like to be recognized. So they're part of your experience. And Ron Willis, who wrote a book called Fragile Magic about responding, would call that the para-aesthetics, the artistic field that surrounds the actual production. So you can mention that and what cues you received even before the show began. And what did that set up for you? Did you have certain expectations as a result of that? Was there a director's note that sort of clued you in to the direction that this particular production would take with this particular script? So, and then once the show were to begin, what world are they creating on the stage? So if you can talk about that world and that fictitious world that's being created, it really helps give you a springboard that is not being specific towards any one student, but instead you're talking about the whole creation that the ensemble created, all of the production elements and the acting put together. I always like to remember that no matter what caliber the show is at, that everyone typically poured their hearts into this and they've really committed to it. So you really want to just have that in the back of your mind. You're really there to support them. And you also want to know about the program. Is this a one-person program? Is it only a theater minor, but they're putting on shows and entering them? Or is it more of a conservatory program where you could be a little more detailed and specific with them? So you really want to gauge that as well, because you want the students to be able to absorb what you're saying and be at the level that they are at. So as far as that goes, report on what you saw again as a witness. You're not evaluating it at the start. You're just being very clear with what you saw and what succeeded for you, and maybe what confused you or what drew you out of the world of the play. Again, then you're not pointing out anyone saying you did this wrong or incorrectly, because that's not your job at all. But instead, something as an audience member watching that particular production, you might have been pulled out because of something that happened, and they should know that. Let's see, avoid superlatives. So rather than saying, I liked that so much, or I loved that, or I hated that, again, that's more evaluative, and instead you're being descriptive. So you might say that you appreciated the moment when this happened because it was such a surprise, or it was a choice that you just didn't see coming, or whatever it is. So definitely picking out those moments where something was really effective for you can be a really helpful way to clue them in to what was working. And it might also make them realize, oh, the respondent didn't mention this moment. I wonder if that didn't work as well, or why. So being sure also when you're talking to reinforce the craft of acting when you're talking about it. And that might be talking about characters' objective and how they use different tactics. And was there a through line, a journey through the play with them? And that sort of language, which can really help. And particularly if it's a newer program, they might not have had some of that. So you're going to be able to educate them, which again is part of your job as a respondent and part of the Kennedy Center mission, which is to raise the quality of college and university theater. So you want to report on all aspects of the production. Again, if some of them were relegated to faculty and staff, then you could gloss over that, but certainly really touch upon everything that students were involved in. And you want to be very clear about it, about the acting. What can you say about the acting? Was it that pursuit of an objective with the different tactics that was compelling for you? What about the costumes? Was it a student designer? And you could really talk about that, the lighting, the sound. And did all these elements work in unison, or did some of them confuse you because there seemed to be an odd juxtaposition? And by just explaining what you saw, they might be smiling because they might be thinking, yes, that's what we wanted. We wanted to jar you because of this or that. So again, you're not thinking about how you would have directed it, how you would have imagined it to be. It's all about them and what they decided to do and what choices they made. You want to think about those choices and talk about them. Were there bold choices that you thought were pretty spectacular as far as what the script might have said and what they chose to do? And just remembering that we are academics responding in an academic program and really being part of that educational process. So let's see. You want to also think about the show as far as how it ran. And that's where the stage manager would come in. And of course, the stage manager can be nominated to go to festival and bring their materials to show and get feedback. And so that's really a wonderful thing. Same thing with all the design elements, depending what's happening. And that running of the show is something that oftentimes we take for granted. But if you realize, wow, there were all these costume changes, and did they have dressers back there, and who was a dresser? And that moment was executed so well, there must have been 6 cues all in a row so quickly. Really taking the time to appreciate the stage management team, the crew, even the board ops when the lighting and the sound go smoothly. And then thinking about how did they choose to approach this script? And that is their prerogative, the director's prerogative, however they came up with that. And maybe it was even a devised piece, and you want to recognize that and what goal they might have had in mind with that original creation. So again, you're commenting on their choices, not how you would envision the script being done, but what they did do and what effect did it have. You don't want to talk about your experience with a particular script. Maybe you directed that show, maybe you saw that show on Broadway. So unless there's a short anecdote that you think could be pertinent to their production, maybe it's something you saw in another production that was professional and they did something even better. I mean, that would be a great thing to point out. But otherwise, you're not comparing it to any other show. And you also might talk about the goal that you noted in the director's note. There might have been a goal there, and what the director was hoping the audience would get from it, and how did that work, and what was successful, or what maybe got a little muddy somewhere, and why. So after you make your comments, you can ask questions of that team, and you want to approach that with curiosity and not judgment. So you might ask them, did you happen to consider this other way of doing that moment? And maybe they did, and maybe they'll tell you how, yes, we tried it that way, but this happened, and you don't know that. Or just, did you happen to think about this as you were going through the analysis of the text? So it's really asking questions that are open-ended and letting you receive a clearer vision of what they were trying to do. And it might allow you to even provide more specific comments after that for it. Then you want to see, obviously, if they have any questions for you. I often find that a cast can be very quiet. So sometimes you can prompt them if there's something you're hoping they have a question about. And oftentimes someone will raise their hand and say, did you like it? And I think that's a question to avoid, and just say, hey, I'm not here for that. I'm really here to educate you and give you my reaction as a fellow audience member. And also letting them know that with any audience member, it's really hard right after a show to ask someone, did you like it? Because instead, a typical audience member is going to be processing what you just gave them, and you want to give them time to do that. So instead, I think the best interaction you can have right after a show is over with your audience members is just to thank them for being there. We need an audience in order to have that interaction, in order to be able to put on a performance. So we're thankful that we have our audience members. And if they then engage you and talk about moments, that's great. But that gives you something that you can say, the appreciation for them, and lets them say, yeah, I'm going to be thinking about that for a while, or whatever their response might be. So just thinking about that. And then I like to end my response session typically with, what am I taking away? How am I slightly different now from having watched your show than I was when I walked into the theater? And that could be, maybe I'm thinking about a certain value. Maybe I have a newfound empathy because of something I saw on stage, some sort of situation. Maybe I've had a mini revelation for my own life and think, wow, that could apply to me. Whatever it is, so you're leaving them, that's a gift you can give them as far as what you're going to take away. And then what I also do is during intermission and right after the show, I mill around with the audience, and I've got my pad there so I can surreptitiously jot things down, but I listen in on what the audience members are saying. And if there are fun things that I get from those audience members, I report that back and I say, just so you know, tonight's audience gasped when you jumped out of that box. Or, oh, I heard someone at intermission saying they're just on edge trying to figure out what's happening with this and that character, and they're so excited for Act Two. So again, any positive comments you can give to support them. So that's what I've got for you today, and I hope that just gives you some pointers of how to approach the response, particularly if you're newer to it, and how to keep it very supportive while still being very clear, precise, and educating our students. So thank you for listening.
Hello there, my name is Rashad Matthews, he, they pronouns, and I attended Bowie State University, graduated in 2020. When the respondent came to our school, just be kind of cognitive of assuming a person's identity. Really get to know the actor, present your pronouns so they can feel comfortable presenting theirs. But that was one of the negative things that impacted me as a performer and as a person when the respondent came and they assumed that I was a woman and I am clearly a male. So yeah, just be cognitive of that.
Welcome to our module on cultural humility and competence in the theater. My name is Lynn Garia. I am currently a Senior Manager of Equity for a Canadian school board and also an Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Consultant. In a previous life, in a former career, I was a professor of psychology for over 20 years, and during that time, I became saliently aware of the imperative need to be intentional towards equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. The realization of these concepts do not organically happen in any organization. Our society is designed to privilege some and oppress others. In this short video, Dr. Stephanie Nixon explains how privilege and oppression are like two sides of the same coin, and that both sides are relevant to achieve equity.
I understand privilege as the top side of a coin, such that the coin itself is the social structure or a systemic force that gives unearned advantage or privilege to some, and the exact same structure gives unearned disadvantage or oppression to others. And so what would that look like? Well, there are many different coins in society. One might be racism. And the way that racism operates is that it gives an unearned advantage to people who are white. And it gives an unearned disadvantage to people of color, people who are not white. Or it could be ableism, which gives an unearned advantage to able-bodied people and unearned disadvantage to people with disabilities. Heterosexism, straight, not straight. Sexism, male, female. Cisgenderism, C-I-S genderism, people whose sex assignment at birth, it's a boy, matches the identity they grew up with. And they grow up feeling like a boy, versus anyone who doesn't have that match. All right? So this is the idea of waking up to that it's not just the groups on the bottom who are relevant for health equity, but it's these groups on the top that need to become less oblivious about the way these same structures actually influence them in the opposite way that they influence these disadvantaged groups.
Any system produces what it is designed to produce. On the flip side, inequity is a product of design. It can be redesigned. As students, educators, and practitioners, we need to redesign our systems. As you think about your work in the theater, think about how the theater can represent equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and be a model for other professions and organizations. In our pursuit to redesign our systems, we must adopt an equity lens. The equity lens is like a pair of glasses. It helps you see things from a new perspective and helps us to be able to more effectively in our everyday work get a clearer focus and more complete view of equity and inclusion. The purpose of an equity lens is to be deliberately inclusive as an organization makes decisions and sets policies. It introduces a set of questions into the decision that help the decision makers focus on equity in both their process and their outcome. We can start with 3 basic questions. Who is not included in the work that you do? What could be contributing to this exclusion? What could you do differently to ensure inclusion? To answer these questions, you must consider diversity, check your assumptions, ask about inclusion, and apply it to your work. Apply it to your work every day. That means you must take action. This leads us to cultural humility and competence. When I started consulting on equity issues, I spent a lot of time talking about developing cultural competence. However, I think cultural competence is both the starting game and the end game, and cultural humility is in the middle. Let me explain. People who tend to be highly culturally competent want to seek out other cultures, cultures that are different than their own. However, to do that well, you need to develop cultural humility. Both cultural competence and cultural humility require developing cultural self-awareness. This means becoming aware of your own cultural norms, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. Identifying and examining your own personal biases, stereotypes, and prejudices. Considering the impact cultural differences might have on your interactions with people who come from a different cultural background than your own. If you come from the privileged majority, then think about your interactions with people from the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, people of color community. If you come from the privileged majority, think about your impact on the Two-Spirit LGBTQ+ community. If you come from the privileged majority, think about people who come from a lower socioeconomic status than you. Both cultural competence and cultural humility require gaining cultural knowledge. This means being comfortable with not knowing, balancing your expert knowledge with being open to learning from the community and their lived experience. It means being curious about other cultures, asking questions that are relevant to your work, not intrusive, reading about other texts, viewing films, documentaries, studying other languages, attending classes, attending workshops, learning as much as you can about other cultures. It includes attending cultural events and festivals. It means establishing trusting relationships with community confidants or connectors who are able to provide insights into cultural norms, family practices, communication styles, traditions, etc. While those are the characteristics of cultural humility and cultural competence, cultural humility requires more. It requires understanding and addressing power imbalances. This means studying the history and understanding the current dynamics of race and racism. This means being fully aware that we live in a sexist society, that we live in a homophobic society, that we live in a transphobic society. We need to acknowledge the anti-Semitism, the Islamophobia that still exists in our society today. A person willing to understand and address power imbalances will do as much equity training as possible and learn how to develop and evaluate culturally relevant and appropriate programs, materials, and interventions. Cultural humility also requires that we hold Are systems accountable for providing inclusive and equitable programs and services? I will end with this video on the pursuit of cultural competence and the ongoing process of cultural humility.
Cultural competency and cultural humility. You may have heard these terms before, possibly in the context of healthcare settings, and not quite understood what they meant. Let's go over what these terms mean and how they apply to everyday life. To be culturally competent is to learn about other cultures, control your biases, and adapt your behaviors and communication style considering the background of people around you. The goal of cultural competency is effective and informed interaction across various cultures. At face value, cultural competency sounds ideal, but it may actually lead us to rely on generalizations about certain groups rather than recognizing the uniqueness of each individual. We also have to ask ourselves, is it realistic or even possible for people to learn everything about other cultures and become completely bias-free? That's where cultural humility comes in. To be culturally humble is to be aware of social power imbalances, respect other people's values and beliefs, and continuously reflect on your own biases. With cultural humility, there's no expectation that you memorize everything there is to know about other groups. Instead, it's a lifelong process of asking yourself how your own biases might impact the way you treat and understand others, alongside work to minimize that impact. Cultural competency is a goal, while cultural humility is a mindset. Let's go over a few ways to practice cultural humility in our daily lives. Recognize that no culture is superior to another. Become comfortable with reflecting on and acknowledging mistakes you've made. Be honest when you're not sure about something. Learn about other cultures with the awareness that you'll never reach perfect understanding. Ask the people in your life if you can have open discussions and hold each other accountable during your learning journey. The great thing about cultural humility is that it acknowledges that no one can get it right all the time. In fact, a key component of cultural humility is being open about what we haven't learned yet. Although it can feel really uncomfortable to admit when we're wrong or don't know something, that vulnerability leaves room for us to continuously learn, grow, and promote equity and inclusion in our communities.
Hello, my name is Matthew Pazulich, and my pronouns are he, him, his, and I am a graduate of Adelphi University. I have two different ends of the spectrum of respondent experiences through ACTF, one of which I was heavily talked down to as a designer. My work was singled out, a lot of unconstructive critique, and that felt very personal. I was often compared to the professional production, and the interpretation of the play, which was not in my control, was heavily blamed on me. And then on the other end of the spectrum, as a director, I received really positive and thoughtful feedback that was geared first through the form of questions. So it was an active dialogue between respondent and myself, and then room for constructive feedback and questions, and that involved more than just one person also. Thank you.
So I just want to go over a couple of changes to the respondent system here with Region 2 this year. So first of all, if you go to the respondent page, you'll see there are two boxes on the page. The first one is the online response form, and if you click into that, that's now both for both associate and participating productions. Once you click, it'll just change the form for you depending on whether you're doing an associate or a participating production. The other one is your online reimbursement form, and you will see a change in that as well, as we are asking you to think about donating your travel back to the region. Just a thought. Also, we've got your respondent sign up. This here is our new form you may have seen. We're just wanting to get to know you a little better, learn about what your interests are, what your training is, and who you are, so we can better serve both you as a respondent and our host institutions. we are working on training videos, like the one that's coming soon that you're watching right now. But also, if you would watch The Danger of the Single Story, that is being watched in all the regions to really think about how you are responding to student work. We do have a cheat sheet that you can download and help you as you go to the schools. That should give you all of the information that you might need in the minute. So we've got these 3 boxes at the bottom, what to do before you go. So all of these types of information, it's all here for you. The responses are set through our response coordinators, who are, of course, Lisa Grand, Trish Ralph, and Tom Colonna. We want to thank you for being a respondent, for taking time to watch this video, and for really giving our students the best response possible. There are a lot of new ideas that are coming through from nationals and from the other regions, and we want to make sure Region 2 stays at the top of our game and that we are the region that everybody else looks to. So thank you again for taking the time to watch this video, and I'll see you at Festival at Westchester.